Heck of a deal. Who all we got? I'm Randy Hill. Who else was on here?
Greg Evans,
Greg Evans, glad to meet you.
Eugene City Councilor. Nice to meet you too.
I'm glad to have you here.
Yep.
I see Sandy. I see Dave, Sherry, Damien. We've met at the board meeting. Jim, Sandy, Rush. Hello, Kelsey. The guy known as Kelsey Wood looks like Quigley down under if you'll look at him carefully. Go ahead, Kelsey, laugh. Yeah. Well, welcome to our fireside chat. I don't know that we've got everybody that we'd like to have, but we've got a good mix from across the council. The the speakers tonight are here to help us from overcome some biases, I think, and give us some experiences and tell us how we can help. And if our other guy, Scott Empikoven, would come on board, we can get him going. Scott, are you here yet?
Scott is trying to get logged in now.
See, it's all of us folks that are having these technology challenges. Sherry's down there grinning because she's got this stuff wired tight. It's all right. Sherry, I'm glad you're on mute. That way I don't have to feel bad about it. Come on, Scott.
I had to dial in on my phone because my computer's not cooperating with me. So, I got it loaded from a couple of different angles.
There you go. Yeah, I've got this odd mix here at home. I'm working from home these days, so I've got a laptop that I'm remoting in to work, but I don't have audio and video capabilities on the laptop. Therefore, I'm using my iPad to hold this particular meeting. So it's a weird lash up. And Scott's there in the office. He's got all kinds of good stuff.
I may have to see if I can assist him with any of that.
Yeah, that would help quite a bit. Oh heck, we could sing, I guess. Rush is back there trying to dive into the lake. Everybody see Rush there with his lake background? It's good stuff.
That is not a current photo, Rush. They had 9 inches of snow there last week.
Well, that's what you told me last night, Jim, or the day, whatever recent meeting happened to be.
Oh, it's an original photo that I took, so I'm using it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Rode my bike around that beast.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
That's a long haul.
I might have been able to do that 10 or 15 years ago, but not anymore. That's tough.
I did it when I was your age, Randy.
Oh, thank you. I'm feeling old.
I was 45 actually, so it was just 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, just 3 or 4 years ago. I got it. Yeah, we got some other players on here too. We got Laura's on here. Yeah, okay. So we're beginning to reach out a little bit. This is our second fireside chat for those of you who are kind of new to this. And the idea here is to enhance our communication, not replace anything, but the effort is to expand, attempt to improve, give some more frequent updates than you might get out of Trail Smoke. And we'll run this way for some months and see how we go. However, we're going to have to get our scout executive involved here to give us a hand. Is he there yet, Dave? Do you see him? I don't see him. I don't see him on the.
I'm with you, Randy.
Are you?
Yeah, I was struggling how to get in. You'd think after all these months of Zoom meetings, I'd know what I'm doing now, but apparently not completely.
Yeah, your video's not turned on, I think. Maybe it is. I don't know. Okay, tell you what, Scott, if you want to take it away, I'll bail out on the video side so that you're visible. How's that?
Okay. Well, just real quickly, just wanted to give anybody or everybody updates on what's happening. Really not a whole lot to update everybody on. We continue to work with the state and just contacted Lane Lane County Health Department yesterday to get a clarification on overnight camps and overnight camping. And we'll get that information out to everybody, but still encouraging all of our units to continue to meet. It looks like, I don't want to say we aren't going to do it in person, but I think the discussion the other day was that we're looking at a virtual day camp that will be council-wide, and we're starting to work on that. Again, I just want to remind anybody and everybody that wants to file for extensions. I've heard of a couple that are getting real close to that 18th birthday, and if you need to file for an extension or know of somebody that needs to file for an extension to get their Eagle, we are granting 3 months extension, but they have to send that information in to us and actually request that. And Dave's on the Zoom video as well. And that goes to he and I. We discuss it. The advancement committee makes the decision, and then we can go in and log on and do that. So please, don't wait till the last minute to get that done. Get that taken care of. Get that information to us, and we'll take care of it for you.
Yep, solid advice, no doubt.
So first of all, I just wanted to say, Damian, thank you very much, and Greg, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Correct me if on your titles, if I'm wrong on anything, please correct me. But I would like to introduce to everybody Damian Pitts. Damian is a board member for Oregon Trail Council. Grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. Eagle Scout out of a troop in Memphis, Tennessee, and now works as academic advisor and diversity initiative specialist for the University of Oregon. Is that correct?
It is.
Okay, thanks, Damian. Thank you very much for joining us. And also wanted to introduce Greg Evans. Greg Evans is also a board member. Did a great job. Thank you very much, Greg, for helping us out at our kickoff breakfast this year. Greg is Director of African American Student Programs and Professor of Ethnic Studies at Lane Community College. And
well, actually, I got promoted, Scott, a few years ago. So I'm Associate Vice President for Equity and Inclusion at Lane.
Okay, I apologize about that,
Okay.
Greg. And also one of our city councilors for my area, just so you know, Greg. So,
Okay.
and Greg was in the Cub Scout program, correct, in the Cleveland area?
Yep, I was in Cub Scouts and went through Webelos, and 3 of my sons have been through Cub Scouts and Webelos. One of them went into Boy Scouts here, but you know, they've been involved.
Is that Cleveland, Tennessee, or Cleveland, Ohio?
Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay.
Cleveland, Texas, too, so look out.
There's a Cleveland, Mississippi, too. Lots of Clevelands.
Yeah.
You know, really wanted to invite you guys on and just have a discussion tonight. And I really wish we had a lot more time, but I think maybe this is a starting point for us so that we can continue to have discussions and educate our scouting community on several things. But with everything that's happening, you know, in Minneapolis, across the country, and across the world, we wanted to have a discussion tonight. And if you guys are okay with it, what I'd really like to do, I think, between Randy and I, is just ask you guys some questions and get your thoughts on some questions that we have and that anybody else might have as well.
Sure.
Okay. I just wanted to start off by saying, you know, to me, I think scouting is probably perceived as not a very diverse group, and probably rightly so. And I would just ask you guys how you feel we can help scouters, scouting community, scouting family can help achieve a more diverse scouting community. What can we do to make that happen?
You want to go ahead, Damian?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the one thing is, you know, figuring out the appeal. The majority of African Americans in the United States live in fairly urban areas, and so they don't have access to the outdoors like we do in Oregon, nor is it something that a lot of us are even exposed to at an early age. And so you have to figure out how to even reach different demographics. But then also, if you want to diversify, do it because it's the right thing to do, and you know that your program can sustain these different cultures and demographics, as opposed to doing it just so you can say, hey, look, you got a couple of black kids, a couple of brown kids. They need to be able to see themselves as part of it and not the token, I would say. So yeah, I mean, I think that would be like the main points.
Yeah, it's not a check-a-block thing by any means.
And I think I'm a little bit older than Damien. So when I grew up in Cleveland, and we had a robust scouting program, it was a critical part of our community. So I remember, we held scouting meetings at Lee Road Baptist Church. Our troop numbers was 155. No, that was my street number, but 551. And for a number of years, it was a critical part of how our community developed and how our community supported our youth, and particularly our boys. But over the 70s and moving into the 80s, scouting kind of went out of fashion. And we didn't have the leadership in the community that we had once had. So I'll just give you an example. The scoutmaster for our troop was John Wooten. So some of you guys may be old enough to remember. He was the pulling guard for the Cleveland Browns. And he led the blocking for Jim Brown and Leroy Kelly and all of those guys. Those guys lived in the community. They were involved in the community, and they provided, support for those of us. Like my father died when I was 4. Provided that kind of support and that kind of male mentorship and leadership that we needed. And over the years, things have changed, and scouting has not been as prominent or integral in the inner city as it once was. And we used to go out on, camping outings and all of that, outside of Cleveland in the rural parts of Ohio and Pennsylvania. And we had a lot of fun. And, I think that that's something that we need to rekindle that interest, particularly in this state, with our youth of color, which are increasing every day.
Yeah. And then, going back to something you said, Damien, I agree with you completely. That, I guess my goal is to make sure that the scouting community reflects the overall community. That's what I'd like to see. So I know, Randy, you had a question, I think, too. So.
Yeah, I think, not to pin you guys down too hard, but I think the scouters that are here can perhaps put the pieces together a little better if they can understand what sort of personal experiences you had in scouting, perhaps, where things that we should avoid, things that we should improve upon from your own experience, if you can speak to those things.
So my experience was actually fairly positive. I was in an all-black troop at a very large, predominantly black church. And so honestly, we were somewhat privileged because we actually got quite a bit of funding from the church, and then a lot of different boys were part of it. And but I do recall going to, I mean, even though Memphis is, I think, currently 65% black, there were probably 2 black troops in the whole city. And the other troops, they might have had 1 or 2 minority, but that was it. And so we'd go to these camps, and we would kind of get the side looks. It was weird to see an all-black troop. I remember our scout leaders telling us that we had to be better, so they would look down on us. But honestly, I think my experience was actually fairly positive. I don't think I experienced any blatant racism in any of the camps that I went to. Definitely got the looks. Definitely, there was the stereotype threat of not being good enough, I think, to a certain extent. But we had some really amazing leaders. One of my leaders before he was killed in line of duty was a cop. My mother was a scout leader at one point, and so my experience was really good. However, it wasn't really cool to be a Boy Scout. I mean, I got my Eagle when I was 16, and when all my friends were partying, I was going camping, and it wasn't cool at all. And just in the black community, I just think that being a Boy Scout, being in the scouting period, isn't something that's highly looked upon. I mean, honestly, if you look at the history of African Americans in scouting, it's not super positive, and people know that. People remember it. There's a lot of literature out there about how the Boy Scouts and Explorer Scouts rejected young black men, and so they went to gangs, or how in 1911, when they finally created some black troops, they were considered special, and they weren't allowed to integrate. And so, I mean, I don't know. I think my experience was great, but I think it's important to understand the negative aspects in order to keep from, having them come up again, but then also, seeing how far we've come. I think scouting program across the nation, across the world, has expanded quite significantly, and not just for African Americans, but for young women, members of the LGBT community as well. And I think we need to keep moving forward. Kind of like what you mentioned earlier, you can't check the box and then be like, okay, we're done, or we got one, or we did this. We have to keep moving, and we have to continually ask them the question, why?
Yeah, exactly. Good point. What about you, Greg? Any thoughts?
My experience is similar to Damon's in that, we in Cleveland, we had all black troops. My mother was a den mother, for example. So the family structure was in place at that time in the late 60s and the early 70s, where you had more intact families than what you do now in the black community. But my experiences were mostly positive. But we knew when we went out camping with the bigger group, that the 2 or 3 black troops that we had kind of stuck out. So that that was just part of the the segregation of the times. We lived in all black neighborhoods. The white kids lived in all white neighborhoods. Puerto Ricans lived in their neighborhoods, and the troop lines followed those racial lines and those racial divisions. I think that the experiences that my sons had in scouting here in Eugene were different than what my experience was, because they were one of only 2 or 3 black kids in Cub Scouts, or when they went up to Boy Scouts, they were they did a year or 2 in Boy Scouts, and then they kind of more gravitated to playing sports. So it was no longer cool anymore. And then they have other kids of color, other African American kids or Latino kids to connect with in those troops. And so they generally just became all white for the most part. I haven't talked to a lot of people that I've known in the African American community here that have had their kids involved in Boy Scouts. So, it's kind of, it's a difficult barrier to navigate, trying to live down some of that reputation of segregation and exclusion that, I grew up with, and, Damon grew up with in Memphis. Those are some hard barriers to break through, but
Yeah,
they can be broken through.
yeah. Rob Jim has his hand up.
So my question about Eugene, when you took your kids to Scouts in Eugene, and you mentioned that you have a lot of friends that their kids don't go into Scouts in Oregon, is that because they feel excluded, that they feel that it's a white guy's club? I was raised in Santa Barbara, California, and Sandra's from LA area, I understand, and we'll talk eventually. But I was, Santa Barbara was about as diverse as can be. And I got my Eagle in 1969 when, beards and longer hair, when you had hair, it was tough, like you said, to be a Boy Scout. But my question is, does Oregon Trail Council make people of color feel excluded? That's really the point. Or is it just people don't want to join? Because I have a lot of friends that don't join Scouts too.
Well, I think people feel excluded, but I don't think that, Oregon Trail has done that on purpose. I think that what I've seen, happen in my kids' experience is that there really wasn't a lot of outreach from Scouts, to diverse communities. So, it was kind of it's always kind of been an inside club thing that, from generation to generation of the white kids in this community and throughout Oregon who have already been exposed to scouting, their parents have been involved in it. It's just kind of been handed down. And there hasn't been a lot of effort to reach out. With my boys, I sought Scouts out for them. And we were meeting at Adams Elementary School and, a couple of other churches locally. But I had to go and seek out Scouts. Scouts didn't seek us out. You see what I'm saying?
My feeling, though, is that's the way it is a lot with Scouts. I was a Scout. My dad wasn't. And I just happened into it. And then I got my boys into it. And like you were in Scouts, so you sought it out. I think where Boy Scouts fail is recruiting. We have recruiting at schools and that stuff. Eugene and Douglas County and all these places in Oregon Trail Council, I'm not aware of any areas like I was in Santa Barbara where we have, different populations of like you said, Puerto Ricans and blacks and Mexicans and that live in certain areas. I think here in Oregon, it's so diverse that that the schools and that when we recruit, we're recruiting everybody. So do you feel that it's a lack of scouting in the people of color's family from before? Because you guys are the exceptions. Being an Eagle Scout, you've got to be what, 35 years old, 40 years old?
I'll be 40 in August.
You'll be 40?
In August, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll be just over 40 in August. So you're the exception in that age group as far as being an Eagle Scout of a person of color, where in Oregon, I really think I could get, it's personally me, I could give a rip. As long as you're a Scout, you're a Scout. You're my brother, my sister now, or whatever. But I just wonder how much of it is that the family ties are not to scouting, so it's not sought out. Do we have to do a better job, not only for people of color, but everybody, to recruit more people?
Yeah, I think it's a rising tide floats all ships is what it amounts to.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's unique about Eugene or Oregon, specifically for African Americans, that there are no communities where the majority of people are black. None.
Right.
I think there used to be in Portland, but there aren't any, especially in Eugene. And so it's hard to say you can target that specific community because those communities don't exist. The majority of the people that I know some people from some black people from Oregon, but the majority of the people that I roll with are not. They're here, I don't know, good 3 to 5 years. And so the culture keeps us wanting to stay. But then also, you're competing with sports. You're competing against with other things. Then also you are competing with the history. Granted, I think on paper Oregon seems to be very liberal, but it's actually super. I'm not gonna say it's conservative, but it's just different. And so sometimes, somebody might have the best intentions, but the avenue of approach is completely wrong. And so once again, just to kind of repeat what Mr. Evans said, I don't think it's anything that the Oregon Trails Council is doing. It's just a matter of interest. You figure I don't know if there are any specifically black scout leaders in Oregon Trails or any other trails, any other councils in Oregon. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to see somebody who looks like you to be able to vouch. You can be the kindest person, but if that person hasn't walked in your shoes or even a similar shoe, it's really hard for them to relate to you.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Scott, Rob, how are we doing on time? We got any questions from other folks outside this conversation? Because I can see we're approaching 7 o'clock.
We are coming up on our time, and there are no questions in the Zoom chat. I'm wondering if anybody that's tuned in tonight might have a question.
How about a comment?
Sorry, Laura, only questions.
Yeah. I have watched the girl troops at Malacca get the same kind of treatment he was talking about the groups of color getting in their situation in other places.
Yeah, side eye and that kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, this isn't related to scouting per se, but my daughter's 15 and she's a freshman at Willamette. And she's played travel softball for the last 6 years. And just the other day, one of her teammates was on social media and made a remark that she hated black people. And one of the other kids who saw that, copied that, and that went viral. When you're one of only, 12 girls on a team and, you're the only black girl on the team, it makes it really tough to, make those connections. And, she's got friends on the team and all of that, but, she really didn't realize, where this girl was coming from after playing with her for years. And some of that, happened to a couple of my boys when they were in scouting where, there's remarks made, there's things that are said, what are you doing here? Why are you in scouts? It's not a black thing. And all of those are really ignorant and hurtful statements.
Yep.
And they tend to, push kids away from scouting. So, there needs to be some kind of process to educate, our kids about how we relate to each other, and not, be prejudiced or bigoted or racist. And that's the problem with some folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Hang on, before we wrap up, let me put in a pitch for next week. Next week, Mr. Jim Wiley is going to tell us all about our facilities and what our camps are doing. But that's next week, right, Jim? You've agreed to do that.
Sure. I didn't know that's what I agreed to, but I'll do it.
Right. Okay, but having said that, I think we got a great conversation going. Rob, Scott, group, I'd like to continue this thing if you don't mind.
I would love to. That was my biggest worry, is we've been trying to keep these at 20 minutes, and this is not a 20-minute discussion. And I know it looked like Sherry and Sandy both had questions, but one question I want to throw out to both Damien and Greg is, you know, as a council and the leadership of the council, and we have several of our staff members on the Zoom meeting tonight, what can we do to be more welcoming to all of our community? What do you feel the Oregon Trail Council can do to be more welcoming to everybody?
Well, you know, Scott, I think that you just have to get out there and, you know, do the networking piece. One of the things is that where, you know, African Americans and Latinos as community really gather is in the churches. So, you know, building relationships with the ministers, building relationships with the deacons and the deaconesses here locally, I think is critical to making those scout connections, because, you know, we've got a lot of, you know, single parents, you know, much more than when I was growing up. My mother was a single mother. But, you know, you don't have a lot of fathers in a lot of these families. And so there are, you know, mothers that are reaching out and needing male role models for their sons. Now that you have girls in Boy Scouts, it's also critical to have those similar role models for young women. And so, you know, one of the avenues that I've found here in Eugene that, you know, is a better network is reaching out to the church communities, as opposed to even going into schools. So that's what I would suggest as a way to make those kind of connections.
Damien?
No, I mean, I think the same thing. You know, I think providing resources and information just in general, but then also, you know, I don't know how easy it is to start another troop. And I think that, you know, because I know once I got on the board, I reached out to some people potentially starting a troop that was a little bit more multicultural. But I mean, it's easier said than done, and you can start it, but who's going to continue it? I mean, I honestly, I don't know if I'll live in Oregon for the rest of my years. And I would hate to be a part of something, then it dissipate. And, you know, I've heard, like, you know, some people say, oh, well, you know, it's been done before, and if you you know, do it, somebody will take it over. And honestly, when it comes to a lot of cultural-based organizations, that's not the case. You know, I'm the appointed advisor for my fraternity, and the chapter hasn't been on campus in 13 years, and it's a historically Black fraternity. And so there was just nobody to take up the reins when the old advisor left, and my alumni chapter's in Portland. And so I think we need to figure out, if we want to do this, you know, how can it be sustainable? How can we potentially start troops? How can we potentially get buy-in from men and women to be leaders within these troops? But then also just how to keep the lines of communication open to where our other scouting programs will understand diversity and inclusion, and not see, you know, the Brown Scouts as tokens, or, you know, exotic, or treat them differently. So pretty much, I mean, and honestly, a lot of it is just changing the culture of some aspects of Oregon.
Right. Okay. I know there were other questions or comments.
You have to unmute yourself, Sandra, bottom left corner.
You want to go?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I guess one of the things that I found up here in Corvallis has been that I've got the interest from the kids, but I'm having a really hard time getting the adults to support them in the minority areas. Is there something that we can do, or I can do differently up here to entice the adults to come in and support the kids?
Well, sometimes some of this stuff is pretty basic. There are a lot of people that are working two jobs. Like I said before, there are, single parent families, multiple kids. And if one of your children is involved in scouting and maybe the others aren't, and they have other things that they're doing involved with homework and all the rest of that, it makes it hard to get around to, scout meetings. Back in my day, and I'm almost 60 years old, we didn't have the mobility or the need to have extra jobs like, we do today. My mother had one job. She was a teacher. So when she got off work, and there was a den meeting that night, she could easily, just morph over into that. But a lot of parents to these days have a lot more pressures on them, particularly parents of color, just trying to make ends meet. It's really tough to also, continuously support your children. So I've been fortunate in that fact, and my life and my marriage and my family, that we've been able to support our children in those activities. But there's a lot of people who can't. And maybe one of the things is that you develop a network where maybe other mothers and fathers in the troop or the den, they'll pick up a kid, bring them to a meeting, provide some transportation, that kind of thing. Because quite often, that's one of the barriers is transportation and getting to meetings.
Yeah, and I don't think that adult involvement is an issue that is specific to any portion of our community, or portion of our population. I think it's something we face throughout scouting is that parental involvement. So.
Yeah. True story. No doubt about it.
There goes Sandra. I can see she's ready.
Okay, so hi, I'm Sandy. I'm the new Greenwood and Cascade District Executive. So I come from LA, where WLACC, the council there, has an outreach program that serves at after-school programs at about 44 LAUSD schools. So from your experience living in Eugene, would you say that it would be better to have an outreach program that would work after school, or would you say like it'd be better to be more inclusive in a way that it's not just an outreach program, it's like everyone's within certain units, if that makes sense?
Personally, I don't know. I mean, I rarely work with non-college students, but I mean, I've tapped into different things, whether it's Black student unions at high schools or, the program that Mr. Evans started as the Rites of Passage. But, these are 9th through 12th graders, and so it might be a little too late to hit them. I don't know.
We go down to middle school.
Okay. Yeah, and so, I mean, I guess what would be I guess my question, if we're going to do an hour, what would be the incentive? I mean, let's be honest, scouting is not exactly cheap. And then with sports being such a big part of, certain communities, how are you going to compete with that? A lot of parents won't let you compete with that, and that's unfortunate. But I mean, these are just some things to think about, who's going to be that voice? Why do you want to bring in more minorities in scouting, and what would be the benefit for the young men and women? And once again, I think these are honest conversations that really need to be had at the executive level, the district level, in order to be straightforward and honest with these parents and these children.
Yeah, key point. No doubt about it. Jim, something else?
Earlier, you mentioned starting a troop of ethnicity or that. To me, that's counterproductive. We're all Boy Scouts. If you look at three of these guys in their khaki shirts, that's the color I go by. You know, you're an Eagle Scout, and you know that a Scout is friendly, and he's you know, everything that says, even to people that are different from us. Everybody doesn't live that dream. I'm an old school guy.
Old.
But I think for us to look to start a troop just for people of color is counterproductive. I mean, we're all in this together. We're in this as Boy Scouts, and we have to respect each other and understand each other. And by being together in a unit, you build friendships and bonds and understandings that last a lifetime. Different than high school track teams, where you're just running together and then you post something on Facebook, like was mentioned earlier. Those aren't Boy Scouts to me. So, you know, that's just my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, I mean, and once again, it was just an idea. I mean, but the truth of the matter is sometimes, and once again, I said multicultural. So that didn't necessarily mean aspects, you know, that would mean like no white people. So when I was a Scout, like Black History Month was huge for us. But also growing up in Memphis, there was a lot of Black history and indigenous history that was their period that was discussed all the time. We were able to see various, you know, things that indigenous Americans had built in Memphis. You know, we were able to do, you know, Black history tours to where, yes, we were Scouts, but we saw ourselves because we were able to embrace parts of our heritage and our culture. And so you can say that, yeah, you know, we're all, you know, they're kind of colorblind ideology, but I mean, think about how many, in your troops, how many times have you all discussed Black History Month? How many of you have actually taken the time to acknowledge the various cultural months? And if the answer is that you haven't, you see why sometimes you have to be able to tap into someone's culture that they understand, they can relate to. Because yes, we might all wear the same color, but we aren't the same. And I guarantee a lot of these troops aren't embracing these cultural months. I mean, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, I didn't know there was any other month other than Black History Month. And so we didn't do it either. But I'm saying nowadays, if you really truly want to be inclusive, then you need to be open to learning about other cultures. I mean, we Scouts have taken indigenous American culture and done all kinds of things with it, and we celebrate that. But when was the last time that we actually talked about what it really means and how problematic some of the things that Scouting has done with elements of Native American culture? And so, yeah, so like I get it. Maybe a multicultural, a separate troop isn't something that is needed, but what are the other troops going to do to at least be exposed to other cultures other than their own? And if it's not happening, then that's the reason that these young men and women aren't joining these troops.
Yeah, let me give you a perspective. Jim, I hear what you're saying. I think there's some role modeling that we need to recognize. And one of the points that I read in the news here in the last couple of weeks with these terrible things that are going on is that it's one thing to, and I don't know that I'm saying it right. It's one thing to not participate as a racist yourself. It's another thing entirely to actively work to overcome racism. And I think that's where I fall down, quite frankly. I find myself just not engaging one way or the other. And let me tell you why that's important to me. I was raised in Dallas, Texas in the 50s and 60s. And all of the Southern stereotypes about blacks and whites, I got to tell you, I was raised right in the middle of it. Okay. And my father, living out in East Texas, was enormously worse until the day he died. He and I could not talk about multicultural activities. We almost came to blows about it. It was just one of those things. So it's taken me a lot of years to try real hard to overcome the way I was raised. Not there yet, but I'm not dead yet either. So I think there's some possibilities if people will be patient and realize that God's not finished with me just yet. Scott, you had something to say.
Well, not something to say. I just wanted to ask Greg and Damien again. And I think this has nothing to do with ethnicity, but as I was listening to you guys talk about your experiences, and Damon, you and I have talked about it quite a bit. And if I remember correctly, several of your buddies, whether it was your patrol or your troop, most of your friends in scouting became Eagle Scouts with you, correct? So you guys both talked about the culture and how how the group you kind of grew up with together. You were all involved in scouting, not wasn't necessarily everybody else, but I think that's one of the issues that we've got right now throughout scouting is the fact that we don't have that culture where we're going to join together. We're going to, and here's our goal. Our goal is to become an Eagle Scout. And I know of one pack in Eugene that they do that as a young person joins as a, then it was Tiger Cubs, but as they joined as a Tiger Cub, now it's Lions, but they made a commitment as to when they were going to earn that Eagle. And somehow I think a lot of us, Greg, you said you're just under 60. Well, several of us on this call are beyond that a little bit. But, I think that's one of the things that scouting's missing right now is the fact that that culture has changed a little bit, and we didn't join together as a group and then work as a group together to achieve a goal. Would you agree with that, or? And if so, I'm not sure how we change that in scouting.
Well, I think, Damon, you could address that because you went further than I did in scouting. But
so honestly, I never ever planned on becoming an Eagle Scout. It wasn't. My mom was like, "You're not getting out." For me, I've never been an athlete. I'm not super competitive with anybody against myself, so I didn't have anything really competing against that. Granted, I was in the choir and other social clubs and all this other stuff, but Boy Scouts was huge. When I was in the 9th grade, my scoutmaster, who was a cop, was accidentally shot by one of his own. He ended up dying, and so we kind of made a pledge to each other that we would all get it, and so that's what actually kept us together. But my scoutmaster who stepped in, he had 2 sons in it. He was very tied to us, and so a lot of it was out of respect for our past scoutmaster, his sons who were in our troop, as well as our current scoutmaster. And so even if we didn't want to do it, we had this deep connection culturally to these men and women who supported us. And if they said, "Hey, you're going to do it," you don't tell a black mother no. And so I had no choice. I'm glad it worked out, but I think my experience was very unique because I remember being interviewed in 1994 at the district office in Memphis, Chickasaw Council, and they talked to all of us. And every time one of us got our Eagle, they did a news story. And so if you know anything about Memphis, there's a lot of bad press coming out. And so this was a feel-good story. It was super important. And so I think there was a lot of pressure because we wanted to honor those who came before us. We wanted to honor our scoutmaster. We wanted to honor our parents. And a lot of that, not to say that it's not in other cultures, but, growing up in where everybody I knew was black, that was something that was so deeply embedded in me that I really didn't have a choice but to continue. So, I mean, as far as changing the culture, I mean, I think we already have. You know, my mom told me stories where she couldn't be a scout leader in the early 80s. She wasn't allowed to because she was a woman. That changed, obviously. You know, with LGBT scout leaders, with women being able to, young ladies being able to be scouts, we have changed. But just because we have changed drastically doesn't mean that we can't stop, and we need to keep going. You know, we can learn about each other. We can, you know, unite under the auspice of we all wear the same colors. You know, they tried that with me when I was in the Army for 10 years. Guess what? It didn't work. This, you know, we all bleed red or we all wear green. They tried that for years. And then they realized that we are negating the differences in cultures and upbringings, and we need to celebrate it versus try to homogenize it. And so I honestly, I think it's what we need to do. And part of that is understanding other cultures, celebrating these other months, being reflective and critical of the history of scouting. You know, we can't only focus on the positive. We got to look at the negative in order to keep from repeating it. Because if you look at what's going on now, we're repeating it. I had a conversation with my father on Sunday, and he marched in Selma in the 60s. And something he said really shook me. He said, you know, I never thought that my children would be going through the same thing that I marched for in the 60s. And he grew up in Columbus, Georgia, went to school in Montgomery, Alabama at Alabama State in the 60s. And to hear him say something like that, I mean, it really shook me to my bone. And so we really need to examine the history of scouting, why it started that way, why it took so long for us to embrace it, and realize that just because we say, hey, everybody's welcome, doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's going to feel welcome.
Right. Good point. Good point. Absolutely. Sandy, you guys?
I'll add this. You know, when I was starting to go through, you know, Cub Scouts in the 60s, we went through 2 race riots in Cleveland. You know, and one of the things that, you know, held our community together was the fact that we had scouts, we had, you know, we had all black troops in the neighborhoods, you know, and they, you know, our troops were able to withstand some of the negative things that came out of those riots, and you know, the fact that, you know, stores were destroyed, homes were destroyed, you know, and never to be brought back again. There's still empty lots, you know, where I grew up that were, you know, destroyed in 1968. So, you know, Scouts was really important, I think, from my perspective, in that it kept us out. It kept us out of the streets. You know, it kept us away from drugs and, you know, other things that were, you know, creeping into the community really fast. You know, and a lot of us, the guys that I grew up with and went through Scouts with, and some of them went further than me and went to Eagle Scout. You know, it literally saved their lives. It saved our lives, because it gave us a good foundation, a good base, you know, for, you know, being able to, you know, have a good, you know, adult life and a good setting. You know, my thoughts are similar to Damon. You have to recognize the fact that we do have differences. We have different experiences. You know, racism affects us a whole lot differently than it affects you as a white person. You know, everybody's got, you know, stories and, you know, stuff that, you know, your parents came home with from the plant or school or whatever. And those frustrations, you know, continue for us today. So what you're seeing out there right now is basically a repeat of what happened in the 60s, but
Yep.
this is even on a bigger scale.
Yep.
And now white people are involved,
Yep.
and they're pissed off. So it's to bring it back to scouting. I think scouting is a critical component for us to rebuild our communities and be able to help our young men and our young women to be successful in their adult lives. The impact on me was profound. So I'm glad my mother put me in it, and I'm glad that I went through the yellow scarf and the blue scarf.
Yeah, good stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, we're approaching an hour. Sandy, you had something else to interject?
Yeah, I just had like a question because so with everything going on now, and I've noticed a lot of organizations have been speaking up. Would you say that Boy Scouts is doing a disservice by not saying anything? Or yeah.
Yeah, I would like to see. I'd like to be Boy Scouts to make a statement in solidarity, with the Black community, because that's one of the doors that is really going to open Scouts up and the Black community up to developing a different relationship than what we have right now.
Right. I think there's like a director of diversity or something like that on a national level. I'm really surprised that nothing has come out from that person.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys were able to see the message that came out from the Gulf Stream Council.
Yeah, I saw that.
But if you haven't, take a look at it. I thought it was really well done, and we did actually post that on the council's Facebook page today, and said we stand with them and support their message of of equality. So I would highly recommend taking a look at that video. Really well done, I thought.
Yeah.
To be real honest with you, scouting has taken a beating in last couple of decades with a lot of negative publicity. So, whatever that we can do to, bridge that gap, I think is important. And, scouting is only going to, continue to be successful by bringing in, communities of color, because communities of color in this country are growing rapidly. So if you don't have Black and brown Scouts, you may come to an issue of overall survival after a while, because the demographics are changing and they're not going backwards. They're going in the other direction.
Yeah. Scott, can you wrap us up? We're at an hour right now.
Okay. Now, I just, like I said, when we first started this and we started talking about it, I knew this was a discussion that wasn't gonna fit within a 20-minute period, and I don't feel it fits within an hour period. It needs to be something that we continue on. But I really, really just want to say thank you very much, Greg and Damien, for being on and joining us tonight and giving your thoughts on what's happening in our country, across the world, and what we can do to help that situation. So thank you guys very, very much.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate it, Scott, and everybody else on the call.
Thank you.
Thanks for helping us, fellas. We appreciate it.
Don't
All
be
right.
strangers.
Yeah.
You know where to find us.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Good night.